Well, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on what time zone you're sitting in today. Welcome to the most recent edition of NCTA's On Track Live webinar. Appreciate everybody taking the time to be here. Just a quick reminder on how the process works. I've got the chat box open here. If you got questions as we go along, feel free to jump in there. Or our guest today is we're going to have more of a fireside chat, not a typical slide presentation. So if you have questions come up along the way, feel free to type them in the chat box that I'll be keeping an eye on, or else do the wavy handy thingy and unmute yourself, join the conversation. Really appreciate it. We're just going to dive right in with the conversation today. Well, actually, I'll do a little shameless self-promotion. This week, we're going to be talking rail safety and particularly some of the politics swirling around that in Washington, D.C. right now. Our next session in July, our guest is going to be Robert Rosenberg at Slover and Loftus. Robert's going to walk us through some of the intricacies surrounding the UP-NS merger. And some of the things that shippers can have in mind as we see this process unfold for the next year or more than a year, depending on whose take on the process you wanna pay attention to. Adrian's smiling. Don't ask Adrian any questions about the merger because she can't answer. So, but we'll have a great discussion in July around that process and some of the complexities that we as shippers should be thinking of as we engage in the process. So without further ado, let's get started on today's topic. I'm really pleased to introduce Adrienne Arnakis. She's the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the Association of American Railroads. Prior to joining AAR in 2018, she served more than 13 years in the U.S. Senate, where she established herself as a policy leader and trusted advisor on transportation infrastructure issues. Most recently in Congress, she served as the Deputy Staff Director on the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation under then Chairman and now Senate Majority Leader John Thune. So in that role, she oversaw operation one of the Senate's most productive and bipartisan committees, which during her tenure enacted more than 50 laws. So which is a good measure of success when you're in the Senate. So without further ado, thank you, Adrian, for taking the time out to join with us today. This is a topic that we don't chat about enough at NCTA, but the politics are so interesting right now. It's great to have somebody who's in the middle of that talk to us about it.
The politics are the most interesting I've ever seen in rail policy. It's usually pretty boring, but it's exciting these days.
I mean, let's jump off right there, Adrian. I mean, I've seen all the headlines. I mean, we've just come off of what's probably the safest year for Class One rail safety in history, and yet we're talking about a Rail Safety Act moving forward in Congress. What exactly is the rail safety situation, and how is that impacting your policy work?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned our safety record. We're really proud of it. Next year is the 200th anniversary of railroading, so we're only at 199 this year, but we had the historic lows for all-time lows for derailments, equipment caused accidents, track caused accidents, and employee injury rates, which to us are super important metrics. I mean, they're pretty self-explanatory why they'd be so important. And we're really, really proud of it. Why then, to your question, is there a Railroad Safety Act debate going on? And that all comes to the political question, which really started in 2023 in that East Palestine accident that happened in Ohio. When you think of, accidents and things that metrics usually that people use to determine if it's a bad accident or how severe it was, you think of deaths and injuries, and neither of those occurred. There was no deaths or injuries, but it was really traumatic for the community. It obviously had a big impact on them. The images that came out of it when they were doing the vent and burn process were horrific and very scary and reminded you of lots of things that you wouldn't want in your backyard. And so it really did lead to, not surprisingly, an initiative by then Senator Vance, now Vice President Vance, and Senator Brown, to introduce legislation to ensure that an accident like that didn't happen again. And, completely understandable, very common, always on board. You're seeing that right now with some aviation legislation that based on that accident at DCA a few years ago. So not unsurprising. Industry is completely on board on working through it. Unfortunately, as the legislation was drafted the days following the accident, and at that point, no one really understood what the causes were. And so what you ended up seeing in the legislation is a bunch of ideas that have been floating around for a long time, many of them labor union priorities, some of them for over 15, 20-year priorities that just got thrown in as a solution, hoping that the cause would be fixed by it without any, waiting for the investigation to take place. And what you see when you look at the final NTSB recommendation report that came out and what's in the legislation, there's only 2 or 3 sections that actually overlap. And some of those sections actually are weaker than what the NTSB recommended, even in those that overlap. So it's a pretty stark contrast when you think of cause and prevention and how those are done. But nevertheless, that was the bill that was introduced. It did make it through the Senate Commerce Committee last year. Senator Vance sat on that committee and ushered it in with all the rest of the Democrat support. And there it sat. Congress ended, Republican sweep, starting all over. But now we have a vice president that's still interested in that legislation. And so he's been, leading the charge from his new position. And he just recently, when we looked at the House, activated the president. So he was tweeting about it, and president's tweets are pretty powerful these days. And so he sends out a tweet, and it really did change the landscape of the committee. Votes switched immensely, and then it sort of just rolled from there. A thing that I thought was also historic in this, I have never seen, it's called a SAP, a Statement of Administration Position. They are very common, but they're usually done when a bill gets to the floor and it's going to be, it's controversial for some way or the other. I had never, in all the time since I've been in DC, started my career in 2005, seen a SAP on a committee amendment vote. I mean, it just doesn't happen. But I'm the lucky winner of one, that's the opposite of my position. It's the opposite of the Willy Wonka golden ticket. So, that's where we are. That's how we got there, and that's how we ended up getting the Railway Safety Act included in the House bill.
Interesting. Maybe walk our audience through because I don't know, we can make them watch the thing from Schoolhouse Rock if you're old enough. You know how a bill becomes a law. We start in a committee and then we go to the thing and all that. Which is Adrian's laughing because that's not actually how bills become law. But in this case, where the Safety Act, walk us through the process. It's been passed through a committee now.
Yes.
What was the process leading up to that, and where does it go from here?
Yes. So, it's a new Congress. All the bills get reintroduced. It actually took a very long time until the Railroad Safety Act was introduced in its form that it passed the Senate committees last year. It wasn't until about 3 months ago that you saw that reintroduced. There had been versions of it floating around, very partisan, honestly, just Democrat driven. But the bipartisan version came back a few months ago in anticipation of the markup, and there it sat. And the interesting thing is this is a situation where the chairman of the committee, Chairman Sam Graves from Kansas, is in a different position, even though he's a Republican, from the president and vice president on the Railroad Safety Act. And so he was very clear throughout the whole process that he was not going to follow the Railroad Safety Act, and instead he wanted to follow the NTSB recommendations. And as I mentioned, those were pretty different, very little overlap. And so he was only willing to take from the RSA what the NTSB recommended. And so that's what you saw in the base text. But all bills after the base text, all the committee members get the opportunity to offer amendments. And they do that at the event called the markup. And we just had that at the end of May. And we knew that this bipartisan group of members led by Congressman Nels from Texas, he's a retiring member, former railroad subcommittee chairman and current aviation subcommittee chairman. We knew he was going to file the amendment. He works with Seth Moulton, who, is was with, when Nels was chairman, he was his ranking member. And so they have a little buddy relationship on all things rail. And so they introduced the amendment together. And we knew it was going to be a hard fight, but with the chairman on our side, we had really good opportunity. And then the middle of the week, 2 days before the markup, the president sent out his tweet, and we were up by 2 votes and ended up being down by about 12. So it was a big switch. So the Railroad Safety Act is now included in the larger Surface Transportation Act, which is called Bill 250, very patriotic. And it is now sort of waiting the next step in the process. And in the House, there's a number of committees that have jurisdiction over this. House Science has some jurisdiction. House Energy and Commerce Committee has some jurisdiction. All of those folks have acted. But the people with the dollars and the money to pay for all this is the House Ways and Means Committee, and they still have not acted. So if you're wanting to watch this and see if we've been making Pope jokes, look for the white smoke. The House Ways and Means Committee is going to be the white smoke, because they have said they're not interested in having a markup on this because it's going to be pretty controversial, and we can talk about why folks are interested because of the cost, until there's guaranteed floor time. And the speaker has said there's not going to be floor time for a while. So they're sort of in a chicken and egg situation. And so you'll know that's been resolved when they schedule their markup. Look for the white smoke, and then you'll know the bill's moving.
Aren't we running out of time though? I mean, doesn't the House have 12 or 15 days of session time between now and the summer break, and then we take all of October off to do the midterm elections? I mean, what are the odds that this thing even gets out of the House before the midterm elections this fall?
I think that's pretty low. You mentioned a lot of things. I've heard the House is even going to probably give back some more days, and they do have a lot of other so-called must-pass vehicles that they have to get done. So they have to finish appropriations. They need to keep the government open, theoretically. And then every Congress likes to pass the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA. So that needs to get done before the end of the year. One thing that makes this bill somewhat unique is it does have a, quote, must-pass component to it, in that it does have the gas tax in it. So everyone's favorite extra 23 cents they pay at the pump is included, and that's why the Ways and Means Committee comes into play. And so before September 30th, they do have to pass either a new bill to reauthorize it for a long period of time, or a short-term extension. I think most people assume it will be a short-term extension. I think most people assume it will ride on the continuing resolution, which is the vehicle that keeps the government open, because there's not any chance they're going to get appropriations done before September 30th. And since they have the same deadline, Congress is lazy. It takes the easy way out. They'll combine them into one. I think that means, though, you'll see a pretty short extension. The Senate traditionally has a rule that anything that rides on the continuing resolution, or CR, has to be the same length as the CR. So if it's an extension until, late November or December, the extension will be until late November, December, and then it will all be revisited. So I think if the bill is going to become law this year, the so-called lame duck, the period after the election but before the Congress wraps up, is going to be the time that it's most likely. But as we'll probably talk about, the Senate isn't doing anything, so I'd say it's a low probability.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, listen, there's a lot of other stuff in this Bill 250 Act, right? I mean, this is highways, this is airports, this is ports, this is mass transit, this is all that stuff. So it's a huge bill, and you mentioned already the Senate hasn't even started to work on it, right?
Correct. And the Senate has probably even more complications because of the number of committees. While it is the same number of committees in the House and Senate, the bill is more evenly divided. The reality in the House, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee writes 80% of the bill. The Ways and Means Committee writes the money, which is probably the second most important. And Science has 6 pages, and ENC has maybe 20 pages. And so, but in the Senate, the House, the committees are divided more equally. So the Environmental and Public Works Committee is who usually leads the way. They have the highway section, so they're the traditional anchor of this legislation. Weirdly, the Banking Committee is involved because that's where transit resides. And then my former committee, the Senate Commerce Committee, has all the rest of the modes of the transportation, so rail and trucks and cars. And then the Secretary's office itself is its own little title, and that's there. And then the Finance Committee, just like Ways and Means, has the money and the taxes. So all four of those have pretty big chunks. It's more 2025, 25, 25, 25, 25. And so it's a lot harder to herd all those cats to get everything done in time.
And if it doesn't get done, by the lame duck session this year, and of course everybody's going to be rolling the dice on what happens to House and Senate control in the elections, January we start all over again, correct?
We start all over again. And while the Senate, you'll probably not see much change in the leaders, like who is chairman and who is ranking member. They might switch parties, but the same individuals will likely hold, the equivalent seats, be it majority or minority. In the House, you're definitely going to see changes because Sam Graves, who is the current chairman, he is not only term limited out from being chairman based on the House Republican rules, but he's also retiring. And so you're going to have a new person sitting in that seat. You're going to likely, the guess is it's going to be Rouser from North Carolina, David Rouser. And so even if they get something done, there'll be new people, and new people have, new ideas, new priorities, want to shuffle the cards in the deck chairs. And so it'll be a new start for sure.
Interesting. So, I obviously don't, want to dip too far into AAR legislative strategy, but if I was sitting in your shoes, there's an element of run the clock on this. Is that right? Or are you making efforts to change Donald Trump's mind? So.
Well, we definitely, I would say the calendar is on our side. That is a helpful part of our strategy for sure. I think there definitely is more to it. Wanting to, obviously working with the White House and trying to get them in a different position would be extremely helpful. And it's something that we've been working on, we continue working on. It's hard to know what happens sort of behind the veil. Our impression is that this is, while the president has weighed in and obviously has the support, this is really a vice president initiative, given his long history. And that, pun intended, he's driving the train on this one. And so a lot of our focus has been trying to see if there's room for changes. I think generally the position that we've found ourselves in is that unless the labor unions, who have, were some of the original authors of a lot of this text, a lot of their priorities in the bill, give sign off, they won't entertain changes. For when you're looking at them in particular. That's not to say they didn't make changes. They, interestingly enough, have made a few changes, which I think do really highlight the fact that this is a political exercise and not a safety exercise. Because, some of the changes they made really, for instance, one of them is in direct conflict with what the NTSB recommended, both in the EP accident and then, interestingly enough, in another report that just came out last week, which also dealt with a rail accident, this one in North Dakota. So it's interesting, if you were thinking this was a quote safety bill, like you hear all the talking points, you would think you would be, moving towards the NTSB, not away from the NTSB. But the changes that they've made have been actually away from the NTSB.
Interesting. So, and that's really you didn't see that one coming, did you? A Republican White House embracing a labor bill, basically?
I've been I don't know if you know The Gambler, that song, The Gambler.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But, yeah.
Again, cultural references. Some of our viewers are too young for that, but yeah.
I love that song. I learned it. My debate teacher in college made us memorize it as his key to winning debates. And the person who wrote the song just passed away, so they've been playing it a lot, and so it's been on my mind. I think we went into this markup, thinking we're in a poker tournament, thinking this is going to be a critical hand, not really knowing if the vice president, had, poker player, the nuts, had the best possible hand. And so some of this was, we're gonna push them and see if they have the whole, the White House, the president, they're gonna actually put their full force behind it. We made a big bet. They called us and had it, and we lost a lot of money, but we
Yeah.
still are playing poker. We
Gotta know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
told them. So they called us, we folded, and we'll keep playing the tournament. My husband's a big poker player. I'm from South Dakota near Deadwood. Chip in a chair is what they call it at a tournament. So we still have a chip. We have a chair. We're in the tournament. We don't have a lot of chips, but we still have some. And time is probably our biggest chip.
Yeah, I hear you. Let's talk a little bit though about the substance, because we've been talking about the politics, but there's several provisions in the Rail Safety Act in particular that could have a direct impact on customers. Could you go through some of those and explain, why shippers like the folks who belong to NCTA should be worried about this, not just the railroads?
Yeah. So I think there's a number of them, and I think some of them are pretty obvious, and then some of them I think get a little, or take a step or two, but could really be impactful. So one of the things the bill does is it takes a provision of law that currently exists. It's called the high flammable, it's HHFT, high hazard flammable train. It's a current regulation, and it basically says if you have a train that has a certain number of cars that contain high hazard flammable materials, you have to treat them a specific way. And there's a number of different regulations that attach to it, but for customers in particular, I would focus on both the speed and the routing. It requires the trains to go on certain routes and only those routes, and it also requires the train to go at a lower speed. This bill expands the definition of high hazard flammable train. It actually changes it and now calls it high hazard train, HHT, instead of HHFT, and then applies all those same restrictions. Interestingly enough, as a general principle, that's something the railroads have no concerns with. We actually already operate these same restrictions on a broader breadth of trains that are required by statute. We call them key trains. You've probably heard about them if you have been involved in railroading at all. But the difference between what's in the bill and what we do is we actually use risk to determine what, we did analysis, if you put this many types of this type of car together, that creates a higher risk, and so we should treat it more carefully. The bill just says, well, we're just going to pick some random numbers. We're going to, the original version said any train with one hazardous car in it has to go by all these. And just to put in perspective, asphalt is a hazardous material. Paint is a hazardous material. There's a lot of things that I think most of us would think are not hazardous that you wouldn't want to apply all these restrictions to. And so, this is one of the areas where if people were actually open to negotiations, this would be an easy win in which folks could feel like they really are, putting some teeth behind the law, but without, disrupting rail service. And the reason these restrictions are important is not just, you could say, oh, well, I don't carry chlorine, or I don't produce this, I don't ship that, so it shouldn't matter to me. Well, one, it could matter if your materials are getting caught, but most importantly, it will matter to you if the train in front of you is carrying those materials, or the train two in front of you is carrying those materials, because it then will, this isn't a highway with 6 lanes. Sometimes you get 2 lanes, and this is if you're on the 1-lane highway in a country road, you're going to be stuck behind that truck or whatever, the slow guy in front of you for a long time, and so it really will decrease fluidity, which also decreases capacity, and will just make train movements, different. It will also artificially change routing. People will have to make routing decisions not based on what makes sense for the commodity of where it's starting and where it's ending, but to meet these restrictions and or to move around some of these other cars. And so it could lead to different transit time changes or some other weird routing interchanges, switches that people don't need, and don't, again, help with the fluidity and stuff. So as a customer, I think that's why you should really be paying attention.
Right. Most of our folks are shipping unit trains of coal, which don't fall under that category. But as you said, the train in front of it and the 2 trains in front of it. And, we've all lived through service disruptions where network congestion becomes very hard to recover from once it
If
gets
you're coming
going.
out of the P&W going west, and then there's that one nice mainline track, and the train in front of you can only go 25 miles an hour, that means you're only going 25 miles an hour.
Right.
And so it definitely could have some pretty significant impacts on fluidity
Aren't,
and service.
are there some other provisions in the bill that would have direct impact even on non-hazardous shippers like coal? I'm thinking, crew size mandates and monitoring mandates. What kinds of, I mean, ultimately the railroads aren't going to pay these costs. It's going to get passed on to the shippers. So what kind of things like that are in the bill as well?
Yeah, I think the two crew size and inspections are the two sections that I would point to there. Crew size, we'll start with that. Currently trains traditionally, freight trains in the US operate with two people in the cab of the locomotive. The infamous train that created this, the EP train, it actually had three men in the cab of the locomotive. So another instance in which this is not actually related to the accident in any way. We have been for a number of years working with our unions on potential opportunities to move from two men in the locomotive to one person in the locomotive. We're actually not getting rid of the second person. We're just putting them in a truck instead of the cab of the locomotive. I'm happy to get into it if anyone cares. It gets real wonky quick, so I won't go into the details. But to do this, we always have done it by collective bargaining. So, we used to have a caboose. We used to have firemen. We used to have the coal shovelers. We used to have a lot more people on our trains, usually an average of 7 to 10 people at sort of the height. Every time we reduced a person off the train, it was done through collective bargaining. And that's how we began this, and that's how we've done it. Unfortunately, our unions wanted to get an advantage in this collective bargaining process. So they've been working both legislatively and through the administration, through the rulemaking process, to get mandates put in place that would prevent us from being able to even negotiate for these things. I think, to me, the most ironic part about this markup and the Bill 250 Act in particular is there is now a provision in that bill that says you can never, forever, till the end of time, for any reason, no matter what, go from 2 to 1 unless Congress changes the law. In the same bill, they have a national framework for autonomous trucks. So to me, that's incongruent. And depending, I personally, whatever your feelings on autonomous vehicles are, I think they're super cool. But if a truck with no driver is driving next to me in the highway, I would feel more nervous than if I was sitting at a crossing and a truck with no train just went across the crossing. Like the rails are on a closed network. Some could argue it's a safer place to try these things. Additionally, we aren't actually going from 2 to 1. 2 to 0. We're trying to go to 2 to 1. Who knows what the future will be, but for the very foreseeable future, 2 to 1 is actually where we want to be. And so to your point, our inability to make any crew size adjustments through negotiations will have a direct impact on cost. In the short run, it's not, as I mentioned, we already have 2 in the crew. It's not going to change anything. But in the long run, as trucks get more autonomous, as platooning or putting like 2 or 3 autonomous trucks together, that's going to create some competitive imbalances that obviously we're really concerned about, and might have some winners and might have some losers depending on where you are. But the reality is, if you're trying to move an entire train of coal, putting it on even a platoon truck is probably not going to be a good alternative. And it is, and it's going to really put us at a competitive disadvantage.
Well, and before we leave the crew size discussion too, it's not just the cost of the labor on the crew size, but that also has an impact on network efficiency. When crews time out, or you got people, you have disasters and people are in the wrong part of the country, and the difference between able to find one person and 2 people, when you need to move that equipment is also a network impact in addition to just the labor cost.
Exactly. And I think it also, you think about other community impacts, like things like block crossings or concerns about long trains. One of the additional things that we're discussing is putting in this legislation. Right now it's a study, but the original was a mandate to cap artificially the length the train could be. Why do you want to do that if you're a union? Because if you can have one train, that's 2 people, but if you have 2 trains, that's 4 people, right? So if you combine those 2 together, you can see a lot of impacts. More trains aren't necessarily better for, again, fluidity, service, things like that, congestion. And then when you have disruptions or crew shortages, hours of service, that just compounds it. So it can really have a cascading effect.
And and the bill also has some stuff on wayside detectors, right? I mean, what's that debate?
It does. Maybe I'll go quick do inspections just real quick because I think that's a sleeping dog as well that people are missing. There are, the original bill actually had 4 different inspection sections. One of them was removed from it. Again, those were supposedly safety critical. NTSB found no inspection problems. And as I mentioned at the beginning, both our track caused accidents and our equipment caused accidents were at an all-time low. That is based on our new inspection technologies that we've been bringing on. They find, one railroad said 75% more flaws before they become problems than the human eye can. Not that surprising. We have limits as people, and radar, sonar, they can see into things and find things we can't. But what this would do in this bill would stop all moving to technology. B, it would leave us where we are with people, where we constantly have to rely on people. And then most disturbing, it doubles down on the existing regulations. One of the sections that's for the locomotive inspections says whatever the current regulation is, you have to double it in perpetuity. So if you look over the time of this regulation, it has the time between inspections has increased, but at the same time, the safety of those locomotives, the defects found in them has decreased. So there is, just like in your car now tells you when it needs an oil change. It tells you when you need to check it. We have all of those diagnostics on, so we don't need a person as often. We still need them, right? You take your car in to get its 30,000 mile service or 50,000 mile service. You don't need 0 people. You don't need 0 inspections. You just need less. And this would say whatever the data says, just double it. Not for any reason, but just for people, basically, to keep people and keep jobs. And what that means, again, is that there will be increased labor costs. Also, it will just be unusable equipment for no reason. You'll have to take equipment out of service for these additional inspections. One that's particularly alarming also for the customer has to do with when you add or take a car. So if you aren't moving in a unit train and you have 20 cars and then they're going to add 20 other cars to it, we do an inspection every time. It's required. You have to walk around, check air brakes, other things like that. They are going to say, and we use the train crew for that. They're going to say that's fine to start, but you can't actually continue on your way before going back to a yard and having another person who's in another union walk around and check that same work too, because they're quote unquote more qualified. The reality is they go through the exact same training, have the exact same inspections, and we found actually the train crews find more than these people. But don't let data and facts lead the way, let headcount lead the way. And so, that's train movements possibly in the opposite direction that you want to go, because if the closest yard is east and you're moving west, you're still going east first to get this inspection. And, that's any car, anytime they come and pick anything up or drop anything off or make any adjustments in the makeup of the train at all, you have to do this. So again, lots of more movements, lots more congestion, frankly, probably more cost with not really any safety benefit.
Right. Is a question from the audience concerning the longer trains. Is there, as shippers, we're all for network fluidity and getting stuff from here to there more efficiently and faster. But we have a very active O&M group that's been looking at potentially some of the equipment impacts on unit trains when they get doubled up and made super long. We don't need to dive into that debate at all, but is there anything in the bill that limits the lengths of trains to prevent doubling? Or
no? So the National Academies of Sciences did a study on trains that was required under the last reauthorization bill, the IIJA, which I can never remember what the actual acronym means, but it means something with the word infrastructure in it. Did require this study. So the study came out Usually National Academies just does a study, but this one actually and said, here's what we found. This one added recommendations, which wasn't requested and also is very unusual. And then there was about a dozen of them, much of which was we need to study this more or that more, or consider this or consider that. They took a lot of those recommendations and implemented it. I didn't see anything in the study itself or what was in the text that specifically talked about that issue about doubling unit trains. I do think, though, there's some stuff that could get done tangentially. And one of the, the ultimate goal and what was originally asked for in the legislation is a cap. I've heard 7,500 feet and I've heard 10,000 feet, neither of which are scientific numbers. They just are a number. I mean, as a staffer who used to just pick numbers sometimes because you'd ask for a reason and people could give it to you, and you're like, oh, okay, well, we'll pick in the middle then, because what else are we going to do? I'm sympathetic to that, but so it could impact it. Again, there's not a mandate for the rulemaking, but this is, what's in there now is a concession to rulemaking and I think that is where there's some folks in Congress would like to go.
Right, but there's no explicit train length limit in the bill. Okay.
No.
Cool. Is there, we talked about physical inspections of the trains. Are they also mandating specific wayside technologies that may or may not still be state of the art?
Yeah. So the detector stuff's interesting, right? So, the whole accident ended up being caused by a bearing failure. And about 30 years ago, the railroad started basically invented, tested and deployed hot bearing detection technology. And that's been running a really long time. And, I think the real result of the NTSB recommendation is the distance between those detectors and the temperature threshold that was set at so that, an action would take, the distance was too long and the temperature threshold was too lower. Pretty much immediately, it was within weeks of the accident, we started closing that and lowering it. So that problem has really been solved. But the legislation, didn't take our word for it, which is fine. And so they put in tons of mandates, not just on this hot bearing detector, but on any detector we put on the ground. And it's not just, the distance or the temperature. It's all of these other requirements. If you put this into the ground, you have to give the control of all those thresholds and temperatures and whatever the measurements to the federal government. Also, how far you put them away. Also, when you get them tested. Also, who does the testing? Also, how often does it everything. And so it just really spirals. And the sad part is that's really going to disincentivize all this new equipment and technology we've been trying to use, which is, to us, what's been driving our safety record. The other thing is there are some shippers that have been really interested in putting in sort of onboard detectors on their cars. Benefits both, obviously potential benefits for the railroad operator itself if that car finds something, but there's a lot of information that can be gleaned from the shipper itself. It's quite unclear exactly how the regulations would impact that, because as it's written, that is a detector and it would then be subject to all these regulations. But as it's written, all those regulations flow to the railroad itself, not the car owner. Again, it's mostly lazy drafting. And it's an issue we've talked about a lot, and they keep saying they're going to fix it, but they haven't. But there is that. The other thing I would say, there is, though, on a positive side, if you're interested in those things, there is a grant program included in the bill that would incentivize that sort of development on cars itself that would be open to car owners.
So, I think speaking, and this is a big topic of conversation at our conferences, Adrian, particularly our O&M conference, is the onboard metrics for private car owners, which is us. So you're saying the bill, obviously shippers would be in favor of taking some government money if it's out there to do more of this stuff. But you're saying there's also possibly a risk that shippers get pulled into being regulated if those language isn't cleaned up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I would say, just for the grant program, we're completely supportive of. We do have a request to make a slight change to it. Obviously, the car owner it's their detector, they should have the information. But if the measurement is of something that's safety critical, we would ask that that information be shared with the operator. So for instance, there's now bearing detectors that go directly on the car itself and are constantly measuring the temperature of the wheel versus just when it goes by. We would like to include in that language that the detector owner would be required to tell the operator that there is a failure occurring so that we could stop the train and prevent a derailment. It's in everyone's best interest, but it's currently not a requirement. And we think, especially if you're using federal money under this guise of safety, the safety benefits should flow to the person who could actually stop the train and not just stop at the whoever is at the data center.
Yeah, and we should chat about that more, but I don't, I think the interest of the shippers and NCTA is in, better maintenance practices and getting, fixing problems sooner and saving money on the maintenance side. And I don't see where anybody would object to sharing information because, something's about to start on fire. So
exactly. And that has not been controversial. It's actually one of the things that even the bill sponsors keep saying they'll change for us, but the change has not occurred, so I just keep talking about it.
Yeah, no, it's good to put on the radar screen. So we've already talked about, the realities of a midterm election year and kind of the clock ticking and all that kind of thing. But given the fact that, we've got an influential vice president who seems to be dug in on this issue, and this is a bipartisan bill that a lot of people want to pass. I mean, what are your next steps as the Railroad Association for where we go from here?
Yes. Well, as a former Senate staffer, I'm going to rely on my wonderful deliberative Senate, I think. The benefit we have there, Chairman Cruz, the head of the Commerce Committee, which has the jurisdiction for rail in this section of the bill, is opposed to this legislation. He voted against it last time when it was brought before the committee. He has said he continues to be opposed to it. Realistically, however, the supporters have the votes in the committee because there are two Republican co-sponsors on the committee, plus all the Democrats support it. That's enough to pass. Anyone can offer an amendment. It can't be defeated. So, while we have, and then also we have other senior members of the committee, including my former boss, Senator Thune, who's now the majority leader, who has just recently also said that he will not let this legislation move forward without significant changes. So I think what we're hoping for is we will go back to the negotiating table. And that's where we're really encouraging folks. We really actually were having very, very productive negotiations last Congress when the Commerce Committee was taking it up. I would say we got about 90% there with the text, and we had two outstanding issues that the chairman and ranking member were trying to work out. And as with all good deals in Congress, until there's a deal on the whole, there's the deal on the part goes away. And if the deal falls apart, you tend to see the language sort of revert back and or even get worse in the short run. And that's what you saw in the Commerce Committee, because again, they went back to their, if there's not a deal, then I'll do what I want in my ideal world. I won't offer you this compromise. If you were in the room, again, we're pretty close. So my hope is that what will happen is we'll get back to the negotiating table and we'll just finish out that 10-15% that we were. And that, even if the vice president's not willing to continue to negotiate, the folks that are actually in charge of moving the legislation now would be open to it. And we'll see, the House and the Senate, I think, have different tolerances for for dealing with presidential pressure. I think the House is a little more sensitive to it to the Senate. And I think, the Senate is starting to get a little tired of some of the shenanigans that at least that's what the news stories say. You never really know. But I think there's going to be some room. And so what we're really encouraging with our Senate folks is to sit down and let's keep talking about it. There is a path that we completely understand the need for, a response. The Ohio delegation feels responsible to their constituents. We understand, but we think the path should be based on the recommendations, based on the cause of the accident, and based on data and facts, and not just sort of thoughts and feelings and head count. Because this is, safety is not supposed to be a head count bill. It's supposed to be a safety bill, weirdly.
Exactly. Well, that all makes great sense. I'll just remind everybody we're coming up toward the end here. If you do have any other questions for Adrian, now would be a good time to throw them out there. Before we wrap up though, Adrian, as long as I've got you, maybe you could let us know what are there, you know, outside of the Rail Safety Act, of course, you know, what other items in this Congress are you tracking, and what do you see happening as we come up on these midterm elections and so forth?
Yeah. One that I am tracking, that you guys will probably care about, especially in the context of your next call, is there's a renomination of one of the current STB board members. It's actually one of the Democrat members. Her term ends at the end of and I think she actually technically expired at the end of last year, and she has 1 year
She's got
calendar.
a hold of her term. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if it's not done by the end of this Congress, she no longer will be able to continue to serve. And then it would just be a 3-0 STB board. I know that's not anything that the chairman of the committee, of the board wants. He wants a bipartisan fulsome board. I think he would actually prefer a fully constituted board, because I think he thinks it lends legitimacy to whatever the final decision is. But she has been renominated, and just today they announced that her sort of reconfirmation hearing is going to be next Wednesday in the Senate Commerce Committee. I think the interesting thing, and the thing I've been asking people about, is how are we going to get her confirmed in the full Senate? This is, I think, the second or maybe the first Democrat nominee of this whole Congress. It is bonkers to me that the first time you see a Democrat in this Congress is at the Surface Transportation Board, which I bet 97 of the 100 senators didn't even know existed. But, you know, we are where we are. And I think it honestly says a lot about the chairman himself, who was able to convince the White House that this is a good idea. And so
doesn't Karen just get mad since they've changed the rules? Doesn't Karen just get mashed up with 30 other confirmations, and maybe they can overlook the D by her name when that happens? Is that what they're counting?
I mean, I think that's one possibility. But I mean, I will say there's not that many, the majority isn't so big. And there are a lot of spiteful people who might say, you have not let us get anything done this whole Congress. We had to create this whole new rule to be nominees. Why am I going to let you get a benefit of this by now? Like by adding her. You haven't helped us with one nominee this whole Congress. Why should I help you with your one nominee?
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. I would hope they could do that. I'd hope, what if in a crazy world we did a package with Democrats and Republicans and got unanimous consent and didn't have to spend, day after day after day voting on nominees? That would even be better. I'm just not sure that's where people's vibes are these days. So that's one thing. I think, obviously the merger gives it special attention, but I think generally speaking, for railroaders and shippers alike, the board and its makeup and having it be fully constituted is in everyone's best interest and really great. So I think that's a good one. The other thing that we've been spending a lot of time on, and it's not just us, so all your other supply chain partners that, be it the trucks or whoever, the ports, everyone has been working on, is the issue of cargo theft. And the specific piece of legislation called the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. I know it says retail, but it's not just a retail bill. They are one of our coalition members. It also is a bill that we support, the truckers support, the ports support, the ocean carriers support. And then we also have lots of the milk producers support, because they keep getting their stuff broken into. And once their seals are broke, they can't sell the dairy products anymore. They just have to throw them away. But, the coalition is big and broad, and we were really excited in May when the House took up the legislation. It passed with 300 and some votes and only 60 no votes. So it's off to the Senate, where in not so helpful way, the floor time is very limited, things like these nominations. And so we're not sure if we're going to get standalone time. So currently we're really focused on getting it added as an amendment to the NDAA bill, the National Defense Authorization Act. It's one of those must-pass pieces of legislation. We really think it has a chance. Senator Grassley is the lead Republican in the Senate. He's getting term limited out of his judiciary role. And then Senator Durbin, who's the ranking member, is a co-sponsor, and he's retiring. So this is being packaged as one of their final swan songs for, on the committee for two long-term serving members that are respected both sides of the aisle. So we're really hoping we can get that done. And we're working really hard. Tomorrow the House has to file their, you have to have all your amendments filed in the House for their bill. So Dave Joyce, who's the lead in the House, is filing in his amendment. So we're working on co-sponsors for that. And then in the Senate, we're also working with Senator Wicker, who's the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, co-sponsor the bill to see if we can get it added. After this, I'm actually talking to Transcom to get their blessing so it can be added to the bill as well. So
There we go.
that is a positive, really important piece of legislation that we really think will do, get us the help we need on the national level to stem this, because it's really multinational crime organizations. This is an international issue. And while, there are a lot of state and local authorities that would like to help us, it's, really too big for them. A lot of this is multi-jurisdictional across state lines, and they're just not capable of doing it. And then you also have the subset of, local jurisdictions that aren't really prosecuting crimes. So, those two problems really mean this has to be a federal solution because it is impacting the whole supply chain.
Interesting. If nobody's ever seen some of those pictures that come out of the Port of LA of, the intermodal trains just being stacked, it's an incredible problem out there. So.
And they're literally, the interesting thing, and this is why you guys might care in particular, is they're not really, they'll know that this train is carrying Nikes, for instance, but they won't stop, they won't attack that train. They'll go 2 trains up front and they'll like shunt it, or they'll take a crossing off, or they'll do something that will force a train 2 or 3 ahead of the one they target to stop. So that then everything has to follow, and then everyone goes to this first train to fix the problem, and then the criminals go to the third train to steal the Nikes out of the back. And so it's not just impacting the impacted, it's everyone along the chain. It's boggles the mind. It's like a movie.
Affecting the network again. Exactly.
Yeah,
so
it's like a movie.
Awesome. Well, we don't envy your job, Adrienne, and it's
interesting and fine.
Yeah, no, we appreciate the heavy lifting you've been doing on the Railcar Safety Act, and appreciate you taking the time today to share with us what some of the priorities are. I don't see any other questions from the group, so I think we'll let you get ready for your next meeting, Adrienne. Good luck getting those Transcom people. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us this week. Remind everybody again, next July session with Rob Rosenberg, we'll talk about some merger stuff. Melinda probably also wants me to do a commercial on the scholarship program. That's the materials are out there now. Scholarships are due July 30th. Applications
31st.
31st. Yeah, that's 30 days. That's September. So July 31st. But Melinda, there's a whole bunch of great materials on the website. The scholarship program is open not just to folks who come to NCTA meetings, but to anybody who works for an NCTA member company. So Melinda has put together posters and announcements you can push out through your individual company, media, and all that kind of stuff. Please help us get the word out about the scholarship program, see if we can get some good applications in by the end of July. Last item, I remind everybody, fall meetings coming up in September at La Fonda on the Plaza in Santa Fe. Great railroading town, great town in general to be in. The registration for that should be opening up here in the next couple of weeks. Watch the On Track newsletter for the links, and we hope to see everybody in Santa Fe in September. So anything else I'm missing, Melinda? Awesome. Great. Well, I'm going to use my favorite line and give everybody back 6 minutes of their hour like I owned it in the first place. So thank you again, Adrienne, for being here, and thanks everybody for chiming in. We'll see you next month.
Bye.
Thanks.